mine." The word was not spoken loudly. It did not need to be. Across the glittering ballroom of Lord Peyton's London residence, beneath 3 enormous chandeliers and the whispering gaze of 300 members of the ton, the Duke of Darlington said it quietly enough that only one person heard. Felicity Westbrook. She had been standing near the ferns again. It had become a habit over the years. Corners were safe. Corners required nothing of her. Corners did not ask her to pretend that the humiliation surrounding her life was invisible, but tonight the corner betrayed her, because when she lifted her eyes she found the most feared man in England looking directly at her. Not politely, not curiously, possessively. Mine. The word seemed to echo inside her chest like something dangerous. The Duke of Darlington began walking toward her. The crowd parted instinctively. No one stepped in his path. Marius Hargrave, 7th Duke of Darlington, did not force people aside. They simply moved. Power had a gravity of its own. Felicity's breath caught. He was tall, taller than any man in the room, broad-shouldered in stark black evening dress, his dark hair combed back with ruthless precision. Candlelight struck his gray eyes and turned them almost silver. Cold eyes, eyes that had ruined men, eyes now fixed on her as though the rest of the ballroom had ceased to exist. She did not understand it. No one ever looked at her like that. Not since she was 17. 17. The memory returned like a bruise beneath the skin. 17 years old in an ivory wedding gown too heavy for her shoulders. 17 years old walking toward a man who did not smile. Lord Godfrey Sutton, Earl of Westbrook, had stood waiting at the altar with the expression of a man reviewing a business agreement he had already signed. He had been 40. Felicity remembered thinking that the dress weighed more than she did. Ivory, satin, seed pearls, endless lace chosen by her mother. No one had asked her opinion. No one had asked her anything. Her father had arranged the marriage 3 months earlier in a London study that smelled of tobacco and brandy. "Lord Westbrook has offered for you," her mother had said that evening, folding linen with careful hands. "Your father has accepted." Felicity had set down her book. "I have never spoken to Lord Westbrook." "You do not need to have spoken to him." Her mother had not looked up. "He is an earl. He earns £12,000 a year and owns an estate in Berkshire. You are the 3rd daughter of a baronet with no fortune." A pause. "This is not a conversation, Felicity, it is a kindness." And so she married him, because in 1845 England, a girl without money married whoever would have her. Gratitude was expected. Silence was required. The wedding breakfast had taken place at Westbrook Hall, a vast Georgian estate that smelled faintly of beeswax, old carpets, and inherited arrogance. Her husband spoke to her twice. The first time was to inform her that her seat at dinner was on his left. The second was to explain that the east wing of the house would be hers, and you are not to enter my study without invitation. That night he came to her chamber. He was efficient, silent. Afterward he dressed and left without a word. Felicity lay awake beneath the silk canopy, listening to his footsteps fade down the corridor. This is my life now, she had thought. She was wrong. It grew worse 4 months later. Lady Adela Cartwright arrived on a Tuesday afternoon with 3 trunks and the confidence of a woman who belonged in the house. She was 32, dark-haired, beautiful, and entirely unapologetic. Felicity learned the truth that evening while her maid brushed her hair. "Lady Cartwright has been given the rose bedroom," Prue Hewitt said carefully. "The one beside his lordship's chambers." Felicity stared at her reflection. "And mine?" "The east wing, my lady." The understanding settled slowly, heavy, permanent. She was not his wife. She was his respectability. A convenient girl who allowed him to keep the woman he actually loved beneath the same roof. The ton knew. Everyone knew. They watched it happen year after year with amused politeness. At dinners Lady Adela hosted beside Felicity's own hearth. At balls where Godfrey escorted his mistress instead of his wife. At gatherings where laughter followed remarks like, "How generous of Lady Westbrook to share her husband." Felicity endured it. The first year she tried. The second year she withdrew. By the 3rd year she had become a ghost moving quietly through the east wing while Lady Adela ruled the house. Only Prue treated her as though she still existed, and somewhere beyond Westbrook Hall, in ballrooms, in gardens, In shadowed corners of society gatherings, a man watched. For 6 years, Marius Hargrave had first seen her during her debut at Almack's. A quiet girl in white muslin standing near the wall while the other debutantes competed for attention. He remembered everything, the way she held her glass of lemonade with both hands, the way she smiled when a servant stumbled, the way that single smile transformed her face. He had intended to court her. 3 weeks later she became engaged to Lord Westbrook. The brandy glass in his hand cracked when he heard the news. Since that night he had watched 6 seasons, 6 years, 6 portraits commissioned secretly from artists who captured her exactly as she was, the girl fading slowly beneath humiliation, until tonight. Tonight he had seen something else. The bruise, hidden beneath powder. His patience ended the moment he saw it, and now, in the crowded ballroom, he stood before her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Lady Westbrook," he said quietly. Felicity rose automatically. "Your Grace." He studied her face, not politely, not briefly, as though memorizing every detail. "I have watched you," he said. The words stunned her into silence. For 6 years, the orchestra played on. People laughed. Glasses clinked. Yet around them the world seemed to narrow into something dangerously private. His gaze lowered to her hands resting in her lap. "You press your thumbnail into your palm when you are frightened," he said softly. Her breath stopped. No one had ever noticed that. "How?" "I notice everything about you." He leaned slightly closer. His voice lowered further. "I know your favorite flower is white camellias. I know you hum when you walk in gardens. I know your husband's mistress sits at your table." The fury beneath his calm voice was terrifying. Felicity whispered, "Why are you telling me this?" His gray eyes darkened. "Because," he said quietly, "I am done watching." And across the ballroom, Lord Westbrook had just begun to notice that the Duke of Darlington was looking at his wife. Lord Westbrook had ignored his wife for 6 years. It took the attention of a duke to make him finally see her. Godfrey Sutton stood near the champagne table at Lord Peyton's ball, his heavy-lidded eyes narrowing across the room as murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. The Duke of Darlington was speaking to Lady Westbrook, not merely greeting her, not politely acknowledging her, speaking to her as though she mattered. The ton noticed everything, and they noticed this. Godfrey's jaw tightened. Beside him, Lady Adela Cartwright followed his gaze with sharp amusement. "Well," she murmured lightly, lifting her glass. "That is unexpected." Godfrey said nothing. Across the ballroom, Felicity sat beside the Duke of Darlington, painfully aware that every eye in London now rested upon them. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "this attention will cause talk." "It already has," Marius replied calmly. His posture was relaxed, but the intensity in his gaze had not softened. "Does that trouble you?" She hesitated. "Everything troubles me," she said quietly. "That is the nature of my position." For a moment his expression darkened. "Yes," he said softly, "I'm aware." Silence lingered between them. Then he stood. "Dance with me." Her breath caught. "I cannot." "You can. I am married." His voice lowered. "And yet your husband dances with another woman." Felicity's gaze dropped to the floor. Across the room, Godfrey had taken Adela's hand and stepped onto the dance floor without a single glance toward his wife. The humiliation was so familiar it almost felt routine. Marius followed her gaze. Something cold settled behind his eyes. "Then tonight," he said quietly, extending his hand, "you will dance with me." Felicity stared at the offered hand, a duke's hand. If she accepted, every whisper in London would ignite. If she refused, she would return to the ferns, the shadows, the quiet erasure she had endured for 6 years. Her heart pounded. Slowly, carefully, she placed her hand in his. The reaction across the ballroom was immediate. Fans stilled, voices hushed, because the Duke of Darlington, who never danced, was leading Lady Westbrook onto the floor. The orchestra faltered for half a breath before recovering. Marius's hand rested lightly at her waist. Even through layers of silk she felt the heat of his touch. "You are trembling," he murmured. "I am dancing with the most powerful man in England while my husband watches," she replied under her breath. "That would make anyone tremble." His mouth curved faintly. I suspect, he said quietly. You are far braver than anyone in this room realizes. The music carried them into the waltz. Felicity had practiced alone for years in the empty East Wing, counting steps beneath her breath while Prue hummed the melody. Now those lonely rehearsals guided her feet across polished marble. She moved gracefully, naturally, and when she lifted her eyes to Marius, he was not watching the dance. He was watching her, as though every movement mattered. Across the room, Godfrey's face darkened with something dangerously close to rage. Adela noticed. Her smile sharpened. Well, she whispered beside him, your wife appears to be enjoying herself. Godfrey crushed his glass between his fingers. Meanwhile, Felicity felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not fear, not humiliation, something warmer, something dangerous. Because for the first time since she was 17, someone in the room looked at her as though she were the most important person there. When the music ended, the applause was polite but stunned. Marius did not release her hand immediately. Instead, he leaned slightly closer. His voice meant only for her. This will become difficult for you. Yes. But I am not stopping. Her pulse skipped. Why? His answer came without hesitation. Because I have waited 6 years. Across the ballroom, Lord Westbrook began pushing through the crowd toward them. His expression promised trouble, and Marius saw it. The Duke's gaze shifted over Felicity's shoulder. His voice dropped to something colder. Ah, your husband has decided to join us. Lord Westbrook did not hurry. That was the first thing Felicity noticed. Godfrey Sutton moved through the ballroom with the slow, deliberate stride of a man who believed the room belonged to him. Conversations faltered as he passed. A few guests stepped aside politely. Others simply watched, because everyone could feel it now. Something had shifted. When he reached them, he did not bow to the Duke of Darlington. He barely inclined his head. Your Grace, he said stiffly. Marius Hargrave returned the look with quiet indifference. Lord Westbrook. Felicity felt the tension coil between them like a drawn blade. Godfrey turned to his wife. His gaze swept over her hand, still resting in the Duke's. Something dark flickered in his expression. I was unaware, he said slowly, that my wife had secured such distinguished company. Felicity withdrew her hand at once. Your Grace was kind enough to request a dance. Godfrey gave a thin smile. Indeed. He glanced toward the dance floor where couples still moved beneath the chandeliers. Kindness is not a quality for which the Duke of Darlington is particularly known. Marius said nothing. His silence was somehow worse than any retort. Godfrey shifted his attention back to Felicity. You have been busy this evening. His voice carried the quiet threat she had learned to recognize. Felicity straightened her shoulders. I was asked to dance, and you accepted. Yes. For a moment, something almost like surprise crossed Godfrey's face. His wife had never spoken to him so directly before. It unsettled him. Before he could respond, Marius spoke. His tone was calm. Your wife dances exceptionally well, Westbrook. The familiarity of the surname without title was deliberate. Godfrey stiffened. Does she? Marius met his gaze evenly. Yes. A pause. Then the Duke added quietly, I suspect there are many things about Lady Westbrook you have never noticed. The insult landed without raising a voice. Godfrey's jaw tightened. Felicity felt the atmosphere around them grow dangerous. The orchestra continued playing, but the nearest guests had stopped pretending not to listen. Godfrey leaned slightly closer to his wife. You will return home shortly, he said under his breath. That will not be necessary, Marius replied calmly. Godfrey's head snapped toward him. I beg your pardon? The Duke's voice remained perfectly measured. I have arranged a carriage for Lady Westbrook this evening. Felicity blinked in surprise. Godfrey laughed sharply. You have arranged... He stopped himself, because suddenly he understood something. This was not courtesy. This was protection, and the realization infuriated him. My wife requires no assistance leaving a ball, Godfrey said coldly. Marius tilted his head slightly. No? His gray eyes drifted briefly across the ballroom, to Adela Cartwright, laughing with 2 gentlemen near the orchestra. Then back to Godfrey. I imagine, the Duke continued quietly, Lady Westbrook spends many evenings leaving rooms unaccompanied. Godfrey's face darkened. The implication was unmistakable. Everyone knew. Everyone had always known, but no one had ever dared say it aloud. Until now. The silence stretched. Then unexpectedly, Godfrey stepped back, not out of submission, out of calculation. "Enjoy the remainder of your evening, Your Grace," he said tightly. He looked at Felicity one last time. "We will speak at home." Then he turned and walked away. Felicity felt the familiar chill of dread settle in her chest. She knew that tone, knew what awaited her later. Beside her, Marius watched Westbrook disappear into the crowd. His voice when he spoke was very quiet. "He frightens you?" Felicity hesitated. "Yes." The Duke's expression hardened slightly. "He will not touch you again." Her breath caught. "You cannot promise that." His gaze moved slowly back to her. The fury in his eyes was controlled, but unmistakable. "Yes," he said softly. "I can." Across the ballroom, Adela Cartwright had turned toward them. And she was smiling. But it was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a woman who had just realized that something dangerous had entered her carefully arranged life. And Felicity had the uneasy feeling that tonight, everything was about to change. Felicity knew the moment she stepped back into Westbrook Hall that the night had not ended. It had only begun. The house was silent, too silent. Servants had long since retired, and the vast Georgian corridors held that peculiar stillness that belonged only to very late hours. She had barely removed her gloves when the study door opened. "Lady Westbrook." Godfrey's voice carried across the hall like a crack of ice. Felicity turned slowly. Her husband stood in the doorway of his study, still in his evening clothes, one hand wrapped around a glass of port. His expression was not merely angry, it was calculating. "You took your time returning," he said. "The ball ended late." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You danced with Darlington?" It was not a question. "Yes." The answer came before she could soften it. Godfrey stared at her. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then he laughed, a quiet, unpleasant sound. "6 years," he said slowly. "And suddenly you discover a talent for attracting dukes." Felicity felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He asked me to dance. And you obeyed." His tone sharpened. "You will not do so again." Felicity lifted her chin. "I cannot control who invites me to dance." Godfrey set his glass down with deliberate force. "You will refuse him?" "I will not insult a duke." "You will do exactly as I say?" The words cracked across the room. The old instinct, to shrink, to apologize, to disappear, rose inside her. But something held it back, something new. Perhaps it was the memory of gray eyes watching her across the ballroom. Perhaps it was the realization that someone somewhere believed she deserved better. "I am your wife," she said quietly. "I am not your servant." The silence that followed felt dangerous. Godfrey stepped closer. For the first time in 6 years, he studied her face properly, not with indifference, with suspicion. "You think Darlington can protect you," he said softly. Felicity said nothing. That silence was answer enough. His hand moved before she could react. The slap echoed against the marble floor. Pain exploded across her cheekbone. Felicity staggered back against the wall. For a moment the room tilted. Godfrey stood over her, breathing hard. "You will remember your place," he said. Then he turned and walked back into his study as though nothing unusual had happened. The door closed. Felicity remained where she was, one hand pressed against her cheek. The sting pulsed beneath her skin. A familiar humiliation threatened to rise. But it did not. Instead, something colder took its place. Slowly she straightened. Across the hallway, a door opened quietly. Prue Hewitt stood there. The older woman took one look at Felicity's face and her expression changed. Not surprise, not pity. Rage. Cold, controlled rage. "My lady," Prue said quietly, guiding her toward the sitting room. Felicity allowed herself to be led to the chair beside the fire. Prue fetched a cloth and pressed it gently to her cheek. Neither woman spoke for several moments. Finally, Prue said softly, "He struck you again." "Yes." Prue's mouth tightened. "That makes 2 times too many." Felicity closed her eyes briefly. "It changes nothing." "Oh, I believe it does." Felicity looked at her. Prue hesitated. Then she leaned closer. "There is something you should know, my lady." Felicity frowned slightly. "What is it?" Prue lowered her voice further. The Duke of Darlington has been making inquiries about this house. The words settled slowly. What kind of inquiries? The kind that require solicitors, Prue replied. And investigators. Felicity's pulse quickened. Prue continued carefully. Servants have been asked questions. Questions about your husband. A long silence followed. Felicity stared at the fire. 6 years of humiliation flickered through her mind like shadows. Finally, she whispered, "Why would he do that?" Prue's expression softened slightly. "My lady," she said quietly, "I suspect the Duke of Darlington is not a man who watches injustice quietly." Felicity's hand drifted unconsciously to her cheek. The bruise would show by morning, and somewhere in London, a man with gray eyes and endless patience was already gathering the truth about her marriage. What Felicity did not yet realize was that she had been gathering it too. For 6 years, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her dressing room, a leather journal filled with careful handwriting, dates, names, every cruelty, every humiliation, evidence, enough evidence to destroy a man. And the Duke of Darlington had just begun to notice that it existed. The bruise could not be hidden, not entirely. By the next afternoon, it had darkened into a faint yellow shadow along Felicity's cheekbone. Powder softened it, but candlelight was unforgiving, and society was observant when scandal promised entertainment. She almost refused Lady Thornton's musical evening. Almost. But refusing invitations only encouraged gossip, and Felicity had spent 6 years learning that silence rarely protected a woman. So she went. The drawing room glittered with candlelight and polite conversation. Ladies clustered around the pianoforte while a soprano attempted a delicate Italian aria. Felicity sat near the back beside a marble column. Old habits, old corners. Yet the moment she entered the room, she felt it. The attention. Whispers rippled softly. Not cruel this time, curious, because the Duke of Darlington had arrived shortly after she had, and everyone knew it. He did not approach her immediately. Marius stood across the room speaking to a pair of diplomats as though the discussion required his complete attention, but his gaze found her more than once. Felicity counted 3 times before the soprano finished her first song. The 4th time their eyes met. He stopped listening to the diplomats entirely. A few minutes later he crossed the room. He did not ask permission to sit. He simply took the chair beside her. "You should not be here tonight," he said quietly. Felicity blinked. "Why?" His gaze lifted slowly to her face. The moment he saw the fading bruise, something inside him went very still. "What happened?" he said softly. It was not a question. It was a demand spoken gently. Felicity looked away. "I walked into a door." His expression did not change. "Try again." Silence stretched between them. The music resumed. Somewhere nearby a glass clinked against porcelain, but Marius did not move. He waited. Finally, Felicity said quietly, "It was my husband." The words hung in the air like something fragile. Marius inhaled slowly. The fury that followed was so controlled it became almost frightening. His hands tightened briefly around the back of his chair. "Did he strike you once?" he asked carefully. "Or more than once?" "Twice." The word escaped before she could stop it. His jaw tightened. The room seemed to grow colder around them. Felicity hurried to speak again. "It is nothing new." That was the wrong thing to say. Marius turned toward her fully. His voice lowered. "That is precisely the problem." She swallowed. "You cannot interfere in a marriage. I can interfere in cruelty. It is the same thing in England." His gaze softened slightly. "No," he said quietly. "It is not." Felicity studied him carefully. "You cannot ruin a man because he mistreats his wife." "I can ruin a man for many reasons," Marius replied calmly. "And I happen to possess several." Despite herself, she almost smiled. Then the weight of reality returned. "You should stop this," she whispered. "Stop what?" "Watching me." He did not hesitate. "No." "Why?" For the first time, something vulnerable flickered behind his composed expression. "Because I cannot." Her breath caught. "You barely know me." "I know enough." "How?" He hesitated only a moment. Then he said quietly, "Because I have loved you since you were 17. The word struck her harder than the slap had. "You cannot mean that." "I do." 6 years? Yes. She stared at him. 6 years. 6 years of silent observation. 6 years of someone seeing what no one else had noticed. Her voice trembled slightly. You should have said something sooner. A shadow crossed his face. You were married. And that stopped you? Yes. The answer came immediately. Felicity felt her chest tighten. You are an extraordinary man, she said softly. Marius shook his head once. No. His gray eyes met hers. I am simply a patient one. Across the room someone laughed loudly. Society continued spinning around them, but Felicity felt something shifting inside her. Something fragile, dangerous. Hope. She lowered her voice. My husband will not allow this. Marius's gaze hardened again. Your husband, he said quietly, is about to discover he does not control everything. Lord Westbrook discovered the truth sooner than expected. The whispers reached him within days. At White's club, at the gaming tables, in the careful silences that followed his name. Men who had once laughed easily beside him now spoke more cautiously. Conversations paused when he entered a room. A few acquaintances suddenly remembered urgent engagements and departed. Godfrey Sutton was not a perceptive man, but even he recognized when society began to turn, and he knew why. The Duke of Darlington, the name echoed in his mind like a threat. He returned to Westbrook Hall in a foul temper that evening. Felicity was seated near the window in the East Wing drawing room with a book resting in her lap when the door opened without warning. Stand up. She looked up slowly. Godfrey stood in the doorway, his expression already flushed with anger. I beg your pardon? You heard me. His voice dropped dangerously. You will prepare to leave London. Her stomach tightened. What do you mean? You are going to the country. The words struck like cold water. You will remain at Westbrook Hall for the remainder of the season. Felicity rose slowly. And why? Godfrey's smile was thin. Because you have forgotten your position. She understood immediately. He was removing her, taking her away from London, from society, from Marius. You cannot simply send me away. I can do anything I please. His voice hardened. You are my wife. Felicity held his gaze. And yet you house your mistress beneath this roof. His eyes flashed. That is not your concern. It has been my concern for 6 years. The air between them thickened. Godfrey stepped closer. You have been behaving improperly. I have done nothing improper. You have encouraged the Duke of Darlington. Felicity felt something inside her steady. I have merely spoken with him. That ends now. His hand slammed against the desk beside her. You will leave London tomorrow morning. No. The word surprised even her. Godfrey froze. What did you say? I will not go. For a moment he simply stared at her. Then his expression darkened with a rage he had rarely seen so plainly. You will obey me. No. The slap came without warning. Her head snapped sideways as pain flared across her cheek. But she did not fall this time. She did not cry. She simply turned back and looked at him. Something in that calm gaze unsettled him. For the first time in years, his wife did not look afraid. You are making a mistake, she said quietly. Godfrey laughed harshly. You forget the law. Yes, Felicity replied softly. I know the law very well. The words unsettled him, but he dismissed the feeling quickly. You will be in the carriage at 6 in the morning. He turned toward the door. If you are not ready, he added coldly, I will have you carried. The door slammed behind him. Felicity stood motionless for several seconds. Then slowly she lifted her hand to her cheek. Her pulse was steady. Because the fear that had ruled her life for 6 years was beginning to disappear. Behind her, the sitting room door opened quietly. Prue stepped inside. The older woman took one look at Felicity's face and inhaled sharply. He struck you again. Yes. Prue's lips pressed into a thin line. That is enough. Felicity turned toward her. What do you mean? Prue walked closer and lowered her voice. I am sending word. To whom? The Duke of Darlington. Felicity hesitated. Then she nodded once, because something in her heart told her the same truth Marius had already reached. 6 years of silence had ended, and before the sun rose, the Duke of Darlington would come. The Duke of Darlington arrived at Westbrook Hall before midnight. He did not send a letter. He did not request permission. He simply appeared. The butler later swore he had never opened a door to a man who looked so completely certain of his purpose. "Your Grace," the man stammered. "Where is Lord Westbrook?" "In the study, sir." Marius Hargrave walked past him without another word. He knew the layout of the house. 6 years of quiet observation had made certain of that. The study door opened sharply. Godfrey Sutton looked up from his desk in surprise. Across the room, Lady Adela Cartwright sat beside the fire reading. Both froze, because the Duke of Darlington had just walked into their house unannounced, and the expression on his face made it very clear. He had not come for conversation. Godfrey rose slowly. "Your Grace," he began stiffly, "this is highly irregular." "Sit down." The command was quiet, absolute. Godfrey hesitated, then despite himself, he obeyed. Marius remained standing. His gray eyes rested on the man across the desk. "You struck your wife." Godfrey's face paled. "I beg your—" "You struck her," Marius repeated calmly. "Twice." Silence filled the room. Adela shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Godfrey attempted a laugh. "A husband disciplining his wife is hardly—" "Careful." The single word stopped him. Marius stepped closer to the desk. "I know everything about this house." Godfrey's hand tightened on the desk edge. "I know about your debts. I know about your mistress. I know about the forged signatures on the bankside mortgage." Godfrey's face drained of color. "And," Marius continued quietly, "I know you intend to remove Lady Westbrook to the country tomorrow." The room fell utterly still. "How could you possibly—" "Because," the Duke said softly, "I have been preparing for this moment for 6 years." Adela rose abruptly. "This is absurd." "You should sit down," Marius told her without looking. She did. Godfrey swallowed hard. "What exactly do you want?" Marius's voice dropped to something dangerously calm. "I want you to listen very carefully." He leaned forward slightly. "If you touch her again, if you raise your voice to her again, if you attempt to move her from London, I will destroy you." The words were not dramatic. They were factual. Godfrey felt it, the absolute certainty behind them. "I will buy every debt you owe," Marius continued quietly. "I will strip every asset you possess. I will bring evidence of your fraud before Parliament. And when the courts are finished with you—" His gray eyes hardened. "I will take your wife." The silence stretched painfully. Godfrey's lips trembled. "You cannot—" "I already have." That was when the study door opened again. Felicity stood there. She had come down quietly after hearing voices in the hall. Her gaze moved between the two men. "Your Grace," she said softly. Marius turned immediately. The fury in his expression softened the moment he saw her. "Are you hurt?" "No." She stepped further into the room. Godfrey looked at her with disbelief. "You called him?" "No." Her voice was calm. "I merely stopped protecting you." Godfrey stared. Then he laughed bitterly. "You think this ends well for you?" Felicity held his gaze. "It already has." She turned toward Marius. For a moment neither spoke. 6 years of silent observation. Months of quiet conversations. Everything unspoken resting between them. Finally Marius extended his hand. Not as a command, a request. "Come with me." Felicity looked at the room. At the husband who had humiliated her. At the mistress who had ruled her house. At the life she had endured for 6 long years. Then she placed her hand in his, and walked away. She never returned to Westbrook Hall again. The divorce that followed shook London society. Evidence appeared. Financial fraud, debts, adultery, cruelty. The Earl of Westbrook lost everything, his estate, his fortune, his reputation. Lady Adela disappeared to the continent before the scandal finished unfolding. And Felicity Vardarden became one of the very few women in England to win a parliamentary divorce. It took nearly a year, but she endured it, because she was no longer alone. Marius never stood beside her publicly during the proceedings. That would have compromised the case. But every morning a letter arrived. Short notes, observations, reassurances, always ending with the same line. "I am here." 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Marius brought her to the 3rd floor of Darlington House. He opened a door. Inside were 6 portraits, 6 paintings of her, each from a different year. Felicity stared in stunned silence. You watched me for 6 years, she whispered.
Yes.
You loved me for 6 years. I did. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I am not the woman in those portraits anymore. Marius crossed the room slowly. He lifted her face gently in his hands. You were never broken, he said softly. You were buried, and I have spent 6 years digging you out. Felicity kissed him first. His hands trembled. The most feared duke in England trembling. Marry me, he whispered.
Yes.
They married quietly that summer. No grand spectacle, only a small chapel, Prue and Satan Graves as witnesses. But when Felicity descended the staircase at her first ball as the Duchess of Darlington, 300 people fell silent, because the woman they had once ignored now stood beside the most powerful man in England. And when he asked her to dance, she smiled, the one that had changed everything. And this time, the entire ballroom watched her.